everybody. I'm so glad I can join this lecture series entitled Peaceful Reunification of Korea, Why the Only Way to World Peace. I remember we began this lecture with a title of Korean Peninsula as a cultural superpower. The reason is that we need a soft power rather than hard power to achieve the real world peace. We might assume that everybody in this world want to have a peace of mind and peaceful world, but it's not really. There are many reasons that some people might prefer to have a conflict, even some organizations, even some organized crimes, and many organizations prefer conflicts and get benefits out of war and conflicts. So that we need some kind of healing power, and we need some kind of education. That's why I began the lecture, the big title, World Peace as a Korean culture, as a cultural superpower we need. And at this time, the fifth and last lecture, we need to combine the lectures I did of division of the Korean Peninsula and the Korean War, its consequences, and the Cold War, because of communist ideas, and then end of Cold War by U.S. democracy, and then still we examine they still have a lot of problems of imperialism, communism, and mutated dictatorship. Even we thought America, we conquered imperialism, fascism, we conquered communism, but we're still kind of experiencing a lot of problems. So that has been our focus of the Pax Americana. The last 30 years, we have a lot of struggles, challenges, and threats. So now we're at the highest point of such a threat to American peace, Pax Americana. But remember, Pax Americana is not ended yet. We still have a hope to move toward harmonious interdependence, not kind of unipolar world that America dictates. So we will discuss that. So that we are at the crossroads of getting into catastrophic collapse because of nuclear weapons now, expanded. And then there are new powers, power struggles, regional powers. So we are in the crossroad of getting into total destruction or harmonious interdependence. So that's why focus of today's lecture is a UN peace zone and as a healing linchpin, as a soft power. So remember, the Korean culture, the 38th parallel has a significant implication in cultural sense. The Korean Peninsula, the upper of the 38th parallel, the Korean founding principle of 경천애인 and 홍익인간. That's a revere heaven and love people and living for the sake of others, benefit the world at large. That's kind of a founding principle. As a peace-loving principle has been suppressed by some kind of forces, communist forces, satanic forces, including most recently the Christianity movement on the Korean Peninsula, just above the 38th parallel. So under such a background, we'll begin what the UN peace zone turned from Korean DMZ will implicate to world peace. So remember, in the Korean Peninsula, we have North Korea and the Korean DMZ and South Korea, 3 zones, okay? So that's where we begin. So as you see the map over here, this is the zone of 4 kilometers by 250 kilometers, 2.5 miles by 155 miles along the line of 38th parallel after the Korean War. It has been, military demarcation line, armistice. And remember, I talked about this linchpin, kind of imagining as a Korean DMZ. So linchpin is, as you see here, 2 machine parts are linked very safely with this safety ring. So this safety ring is kind of harmonious hard power, like a US, Russia, China, and Japan. And this one is more likely cultural power. So we are in the living in the era of soft power should be more powerful than hard power to have a real peace in the world. So that's why it is a healing linchpin. And so this title is The Threats and Opportunities for the New World Order from 2021. So we have China, Russia is over here linked, and North Korea all became nuclear weapons state. And there's this military demarcation line. So COVID, history will tells us more about the greatest impact of COVID-19. 3 years, I imagine sort of 3 years of pandemic, but it, happened that way. So we don't know how deep the impact of COVID-19 in the history of humanity. So we'll see. But I see some kind of interdependence in a more negative way during this period of pandemic. We are all interdependent because of these COVID viruses. There are a lot of interdependence, Zoom interconnectedness, more social media interconnectedness. So a lot of interdependence. So we'll see maybe 100 years later, the impact of COVID. But at least to China at the beginning of COVID was sort of proud of being kind of dictatorship, kind of socialist, ruling because zero COVID. So it appears that China's policy is much more effective than any other part of the world, the zero COVID policy. But the problem actually was much deeper than expected to China, economically and socially. Some analysts say that it is like a PTSD, collective PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder. So everybody has such a trauma after the COVID in China. So every Chinese people still troubling in trusting the Chinese government because COVID policy just stopped abruptly overnight, suddenly. So in economic sense, the economic growth dropped to 4 to 5% annual GDP, but nobody believes the Chinese government statistics. And then debt to GDP is doubled, and it is apparent that China lost 120 billion foreign investment. It is apparent that not many foreign tourists in China for various reasons, and no new investment in China. That's clear. And because of that, there's a rising youth unemployment. Millions of young college graduates, we don't know how many percentage of these young people do not get job. And many young people, including, elite technicians, even daring to come to US illegally through Mexico. They dare to risk their lives. 20,000, 30,000 Chinese people coming through Mexico. And it's a big trouble. Then another big trouble is real estate bubbles of, around 90 million empty, unfinished apartments in many parts of China. That is many documented, media is showing such a figures. So that the implication of this downside of Chinese economy is, the old tactic is the dictatorship trying to divert the inner discontent to outward, kind of so that many countries with dictators trying to attack other countries to divert the attention of internal struggles and problems. So that's why we call it blatant military threat to Taiwan is getting more frequent, especially after the new Taiwanese government assumed power in May last month. There's a really blatant military threat, surrounding the island of Taiwan. And what about South China Sea? Some say they are using the Ming Dynasty's documents and activities to claim the maritime territories of South China Sea. They're using reefs and rocks and some kind of man-made structures to claim their boundary. So this is a huge problem now in South China Sea, in Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia. So I feel like it's more likely rogue style, thug style country based on military with nuclear weapons. What about Russia? Invasion of China, invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Everybody, didn't really expect such an invasion, blatant invasion. It lasted now more than 2 years. It's so lopsided war. I don't remember any war in history that's this kind of war. It's like you're the home and you're fighting with a neighboring house, and the neighboring home throw the stones and shoot the guns and break the windows of yours, and you cannot throw your rock and whatever to other home, other house. You cannot even throw your rock on the threatening adversary's lawn. You cannot, Ukraine cannot invade, cannot, shoot any missile to the territory of Russia because of nuclear weapons threat by Russia. So Ukraine is just having a war within Ukraine territory. It's so lopsided, and then obviously thug and rock style. Russia is doing. What about North Korea? Is an ICBM, with a nuclear warhead, Hwasong 17 and Hwasong 18, threatening directly to Los Angeles, New York, and Washington. That we now know that this is very important. The ICBM technologies is about completed. So one of the major focus of today's lecture is we should not allow such a completeness of ICBM. I'll talk about that later. So China, Russia, and North Korea all became nuclear rogue states. And the DMZ's role, US still consider DMZ as a deterrence line, to deter North Korea from developing nuclear weapons. But North Korea already became nuclear weapon states. So we gotta think creatively what role the DMZ as a zone could be the next role. And North Korea kept ignoring US offer, Biden's actually offer of dialogue with no conditions, because North Korean regime is thinking that no US offer has no real intention, real respect, such things that I'm going to talk about more later. And then North Korea has a now, huge supply of foods and fuels from Russia in return for North Korea provision of ammunition and artillery to Russia. I'll talk about that more. So China, Russia, North Korea has all become nuclear rogue state. So now, from US standpoint, what the US can do to prevent China from attacking and seizing Taiwan and its influence in South China Sea? Actually, not much the US can do. Economically and militarily, technologically, China is much ahead. There's nothing effectively we can do, but Biden administration did something like just kind of diplomatic, chains and networks, chain of islands, kind of containing Chinese forces in South China Sea, East China Sea. And India is included because remember, China and Russia became more, collaborating. There was some sort of personal bond between Putin and Xi Jinping, and some kind of interdependence in their military and economic stages of development, as I explained last lecture. So that's why India is included. And AUKUS, Australia, UK here, and the United States. Security partnership, AUKUS, is a major goal is to empower Australia with nuclear submarines, to counter Chinese threats. Another was the economic chain of suppressing China, containing Chinese technological development, so prohibiting US, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, prohibiting any technological transfer to China. So mostly high tech, equipment, technologies, including semiconductor equipment and technologies. That seems to be very effective. And the economic kind of framework, chains and networks in the Pacific economic framework, but I'm not sure it's very effective because Chinese economic influence is much more stronger and larger in Africa, South and Central America, Southeast Asia. It's much more influential than the US. More countries are trading with China than the US. So US should remember that. And there is a kind of trilateral leaders summit at Camp David between US, South Korea, and Japan. This is very significant in terms of South Korea, Japan's now collaborating in a military sense. That's very unlike previous administration in both South Korea and Japan because of some historical kind of animosities between two countries. But in current stage, this is very effective trilateral kind of containment to China. But I'm not sure in this way China's influence will be contained. We need more. This is just kind of diplomatic framework. If China decided to do something, there's nothing the US can do, nothing Japan and South Korea can do, but get into a war that nobody knows the results. So what about Russia? Russia-Ukraine war, what steps can the US can do to help end? It's very complicated matters. It's a lopsided war, but that one thing clear is that any one-sided winning of the war at the end, like a one-sided war winning of Russia, either Russia or Ukraine, is causing another big problems. So it should be ended with somewhat in between. So some suggest like a Korean DMZ in the middle of the Ukraine, but that's very complicated. So I'm not getting into in detail. So that's something you have to think very hardly what to do in the middle ground. And what about the North Korea? What North Korea can do to protect the US from the threat of North Korean nuclear ICBMs? That's something I strongly believe the US can do immediately, other than this Chinese nuclear threat, Russian nuclear threat. North Korean nuclear threat can be averted. We need some wisdom and creative thinking and revisiting and resetting the US policy. 4, harmonious interdependence of the new world. So we need to have a kind of traditional wisdom of driving a wedge policy. That is kind of Kissinger's idea, and warned that do not let China and Russia to collaborate, but it happened. But still we have a hope that there is a fundamental flaws of dictatorship. Even though Xi Jinping and Putin has some kind of interdependence, we still have a hope to divide and conquer militarily, economically, because of fundamental flaws of dictators. So now I view that North Korea as the weakest link to China because of historical nature between China and North Korea. Recently, I heard a webinar by the former US speaker, Gingrich, such a thing, North Korea and China has such an adverse relationship. And basically North Koreans has such an animosity toward China that is happening right now in a real time political and military sense. Now, between Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un, we don't know how long it will last, but so remember I talked about the map of China. Looks like some people say the big chicken and big hen, and because of adding this region during the Qing dynasty, And then this area is kind of Goguryeo and Dangun Joseon's area that the founding principle of Gyeongcheon-ain and Hongik-ingan was presided. The founding principle, revere heaven, love people, living for the sake of others. This area. But the Korean people just receded to this Korean peninsula. You know that's a significance of 38th parallel division of two Koreas, the regaining cultural power of harmonious interdependence. So that North Korea, even now, is, because of communist idea, it is not playing its proper role, but we need to awaken its people. So that's why what we are doing here. And so this is the most important critical thing. The US should suggest North Korea freeze on nuclear and, more importantly, ICBM technology development reaching US continent, Washington, New York, and Los Angeles. Why? Because it matters of nuclear umbrella of South Korea, Japan, and even Taiwan. So now, if theoretically North Korea completed ICBM, nuclear ICBM to New York, then many South Koreans now questioning the credibility of US nuclear umbrella deterrent. The same question that France asked after the World War II, that when New York and Washington is becoming a sea of fire, the US would risk such a disaster to defend Seoul. If Pyongyang is able to attack Washington and New York, technically, and even theoretically. So it's now just a few years left. North Korea completed its ICBM technologies. So that's why it's a very, very critical moment to maintain non-proliferation treaty, NPT, nuclear dominant. It's very dangerous. The NPT itself is an unfair agreement to most states. But if NPT is kind of broken in one way in South Korea, and Japan also has a rationale that we're threatened by China. Japan should have nuclear weapons. Japan is more than ready to develop nuclear weapons than any of the countries. Then what about Taiwan? Then what about Iran? What about Saudi Arabia? What about Lebanon? This is very dangerous moment of a nuclear proliferation. Although South Korea has, good rationale that North Korea has become a nuclear weapons, but if ROK US defense treaty is strong with no element of North Korean attack on Washington, then US ROK, military alliance is strong, and we don't have to worry about North Korean nuclear attack. The South Korea doesn't have to worry about. If emphasize, but if North Korea has an ability to attack Washington and New York, very unfortunate scenario of nuclear domino is very likely. It's happening in South Korea now, assuming that North Korea completed its ICBM technology. So US should reset its policy toward North Korea and freeze North Korea development of ICBM with nuclear weapons in exchange for US economic sanctions relief. That's a deal, reality. Do not rely on too much on value, that has been presided in US policy for the last 30 years. Okay, do not reward rogue states, bad behavior. That has been kind of thought for the last 30 years. We should not reward North Korea, rogue states, with their bad behaviors. But now is the time, is beyond that argument. We are at the moment of total disaster, catastrophic development of the whole world. North Koreans would not, develop ICBM more, because I believe they have no intention of attack US. But US do not respond in a similar way. North Korea has no choice but to go that way. So it is up to the United States policymakers to change the view of North Korea as a rogue state should not be rewarded. What about China? What about Russia? They're becoming more threatening rogue states. Ukraine, Taiwan, and South China Sea. U.S. should be rethink and reset its policy toward North Korea. And in addition, you should create free economic zone and community. South Korea, North Korea, accommodating, engaging North Korea, and potentially Russia. Why? Russia is another weak link to China. Although there's a possible bond between Putin and Xi Jinping, we still at the Kissinger's idea of divide and conquer. That's traditional, wisdom, military economic policy. So, but Putin is anti-communist. Now, Putin's party is not Communist Party, and Putin is a very strong religious man, unlike China and Xi Jinping. There's the differences. You can, try my wedge. And Russia traditionally and historically has a better relations with both North and South Korea, unlike China. So Russia has a good relations with both Koreas. And that's why Russia's Putin is trying to engage South Korea, thinking about, after the war redevelopment. The South Korean capital, South Korean technology is much more needed than North Korean help after the war. Right now, Russia needs North Korean ammunitions and, artilleries and things like that. But what about after the war? That's why there's a diplomatic balance in between South Korea and Russia. And North Korea is thinking more about as an Asian nation rather than European nation from now on for the next 30 years or more. Like they're thinking about North Pole route of economic kind of development from East Asia to Europe using North Pole route. That's more likely happening because of, unfortunately, because of the weather problem in North Pole. And what about Russian gas pipeline? They want to extend, and they want Sakhalin Island development, East Sea. And what about this Bering Strait intercontinental rail and highway project? Russia is very much interested in doing so, developing Siberia, linking, Russia to Alaska and Canada. So that's the Russia's hope from now on is in Asia, East Asia, not in Europe. So in that way, China can be kind of sort of contained. You know what I'm saying? Kind of divide and conquer. The major focus is Chinese Communist Party, Chinese dream, Chinese kind of threat to neighboring countries. So we need to contain. So in that way, but all in all, we need to engage China, in later stage. So along with this military economic divide and conquer hard power policies, we now need soft power solution. That is another focus of today's lecture is cultural and religious healing and education. We need more people who wish for a peaceful world. We need to educate why peace is more important, why peace is leading to happiness rather than conquering, rather than conflict, rather than war. Real peace and happiness, where does it come from? So remember, Korean Peninsula is North Korea and the DMZ and South Korea. US should propose transforming the entire Korean DMZ into UN peace zone. Entire means we need a permission from North Korea. We need an agreement from North Korea, entire. With an expanded UN command, because North Korea does not object US military presence in South Korea. That's what Kim Jong-un said. So do not worry about US military withdrawal from South Korea. Many people argue that when Korean War ended, when DMZ is gone, US military will be withdrawn. No, it will be expanded because North Korea wanted US military in South Korea because of Chinese military threat. Gotta remember that. So peace zone is quid pro quo of peace treaty with North Korea, ending Korean War permanently. And added to this safety kind of ring, safety zone for South Korea, when Korean DMZ becomes a UN peace zone, millions of people from all over the world, including diplomats from China, Russia, and all over the world, and their families and children in the DMZ. And if UN fifth office is in the Korean DMZ, UN peace zone, North Korea will not even dare to attack South Korea. So that's why I call it total tripwire. It's kind of military term, tripwire, that when a person, hit the line, the bombing will go off. So it's tripwire. So no, North Korea will not even dare to hit the UN peace zone in a military way. So don't worry about this military provocation by North Korea. It's a message to South Korean people, especially. So imagine this Korean DMZ turned into UN peace zone. This 14,000 more North Korean artillery will be out of the reason. Remember I said that it can make Seoul a sea of fire, even without any missiles. And remember I talked about the DMZ areas, 2.54 or 5 miles and 155 miles. But here, civilian control zone, here 5 to 20 kilometers. So we can add, depending on the situation, to this peace zone and conservation area. I believe we can do it, and I'm praying, but we should do our own part of responsibility. So let's make it, and thank you, and we hope to see you again online and in real scene of activity, even in Korean DMZ. Thank you, and have a great future. Thank you.